Welcome back to my channel for a super interesting introductory video on a new Leica product. And I'm talking about the brand new Leitzphone powered by Xiaomi. And I picked this up yesterday in the Leica Store in Zurich. Yesterday was Thursday, February 12th. And I have only a few days to review this phone, and then I will have to pass it on to my colleague Raphael Zeyer, who will also have the pleasure to review this product before its official announcement. And what I want to do in this video is I want to introduce that new smartphone to you. But of course, we are talking about photographer via photographers. I really want to find out, is this a pro-like camera in a smartphone, or is it a smartphone with a decent camera? And that's what I'm going to do in this video. Of course, I will shoot a lot of footage before we come to conclusions. I also will provide a technical deep dive on the camera system of the new Leitzphone and will provide some context about the collaboration between Leica and Xiaomi. And in this way, hopefully provide a complete picture of what this new product is all about. Let's kick this off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, support my work. Many thanks for that. All right, the Leitzphone. Here we go. This is the official first Leica phone, but they call it a Leitzphone. And I hope that most of you know that the word Leica is an artificial composite word combining Leitz camera into the 5 letters Leica. And because Leica is Leitz camera, I think it's a good idea to call this a Leitzphone. It is a creative and I think also a good name. If I turn this around, we find a couple of specifications here. So this phone has 16 GB of RAM and 1024 GB of ROM. So plenty of space to store all your creative photography and video encounters. And what I want to do in a moment is opening this box. It's not sealed. My friends in the Leica store in Zurich already played with it, and Ivan, the head of marketing of Leica Switzerland, took a couple of portraits, which I will show to you later in sample images. They were shot in the portrait mode. What I want to do first is quickly talking about Leica and Xiaomi. And they have a collaboration which started not too long ago. Namely on the 23rd of May in 2022. And Xiaomi and Leica Camera announced back then a long-term strategic cooperation under the headline of a new era of mobile imaging begins in July. And the strategic cooperation between Leica and Xiaomi reached a new milestone by the end of December 2025, just when Xiaomi unveiled the new Xiaomi 17 Ultra, which is their current flagship phone and which basically took this collaboration between Leica and Xiaomi to the next level, with a history of jointly developing more than 26 products in 5 regions and 100 countries, give or take. And they speak in this press note here about their highly productive joint research and development foundation, about their new strategic co-creation model, and the Xiaomi 17 Ultra being the first product born from this new collaborative framework. Since we have now a little bit of context and background what Leica and Xiaomi are doing together, let's see what's in this box. And let's have a look at this brand new Leitzphone. Let's lift this up here. As I said, it's not sealed. No need for my Swiss tool, my knife today. And here we get a card, you know, probably not interesting. Here you see the phone was basically used already. Here we go. That's the phone. And we come to design in a moment. It looks beautiful in my opinion, has a very prominent Leica logo here. And here it has also a Leica branding, which specifies the lens here, Vario Apo Summilux, 1 to 1.67 to 2.9, 14 to 100 millimeter. It's an aspherical lens. And you see Leica design elements here all over the place. I come to that in a moment. Let's first check what else is in the box. Packaging material. Let's have a look what this is. I guess this is a case. Well, people who can read have an advantage in life. Yes, it's a case. Let's get all the paperwork aside. And here's the case. Nice texture. And we come to that ring here. I can turn this design ring here, and we come to that in the course of the video. Here this says cables. Let's have a look inside. Okay, there is a nice USB-C to USB-C cable here, which is what I typically prefer. I hate it when people ship USB-C to USB-A cable. I really can't stand it. So that's the cable. And here we have accessories. Let's see what that is. That looks interesting. So first of all, we have here, let's have a look. Okay, that's basically a wrist strap. So you plug this in here, you can anchor your phone here, and then you don't accidentally drop it. Nice red Leica color here and nice texture. It's probably made in the spirit of some of their shoulder straps. Then we have here another accessory. Let's have a look. And this is a very nice lens cap. Look at that. This is really posh. It looks really good. I'm sure it fits on here and protects the lenses. Look at that. You can still turn it. See, I can turn lights camera in 5 letters encoded as Leica upside down. And this is a very nice lens cap, and it's actually very solid on the case. Look at that. I need significant force to remove it, which is always good because that means it doesn't slip off accidentally when I throw a phone into my backpack. And then we have here one more accessory, and this is a cleaning cloth. Very simple. All right, I think that's it. That's all that's in the box. Let me clean this mess up, and then let me start to talk about this phone. And also, again, put it in context with the Xiaomi 17 Ultra, which we talked about already. All right, let's quickly talk about design of the new Leitzphone. And if we look at that, here is a very nice surface. And this looks really good in terms of color. It feels very valuable in hand. We have here the camera island, and there's a ring around the island which can be rotated. And the phone is on currently. I come to the graphical user interface in a moment and talk about that. So it is on, and when I turn this ring here, I get haptic feedback, and it responds very quickly when I turn this ring here. And this is a feature which you will use in taking photos with that camera, in videography, in photography, and you can also customize the function of that ring. I will show you in detail how this works in a moment. And we have here, I mentioned this before, the prominent Leica logo, and the design of the phone with this metal finish on the side here is very nicely done. And there is a knurling here, which is a typical Leica design feature, which I showed and spoke about back then in my video about the 100-year anniversary M11D set. I will post the link down in the info box so you can look this up, but this is a classical Leica design, goes back by 100 years now in the context of the 100-year anniversary. I mentioned that. And I have one example here where I can show this to you. And this is a Xiaomi Looks here. Is a Xiaomi Looks 50mm f1.4. And if you look here, you find here that knurling. Look, and this is on many classical Leica lenses and Leica gear, and is a design feature they adopted here for this beautiful bezel of the phone. And it's really beautiful. It's on both sides. Of course, you have here the on-off switch, and here volume up, volume down. And you have here engraved Leica Camera Germany. But this design element here is adopted and goes back many, many years in Leica history and tradition. And you find it here. Let me quickly unmount this for you so you can see this maybe even better. Look here. Here's the knurling, and here's the knurling. And I think this is nicely paying attention to detail to find this here on the very first Leica phone, which actually has as name Leitzphone. Quite nice. We will talk about this camera island in detail in the course of the video, because I will digest for you all of these 3 cameras here and will explain to you what they mean and also provide the technical background. When we looked what's inside the box, we found this beautiful case here. And the case also has this dominant Leica logo here in red with the nice Leica letters, the engraving here. And there is also a ring on the case which can be turned. And of course, if I snap this phone now in, I can operate this control ring here with its haptic feedback from outside and from the case. So let's get this done quickly. Let's snap it in. And now I can rotate it here and get the same haptic feedback. And as I said, I'll show you in a moment how to customize the function of this ring and how to use it for a smooth workflow in photography and videography. So this is beautiful. It's a nice texture here on the case, and it will protect this phone very well, I guess. Although if you smash it to the ground and it's a stone floor, the glass here on the camera island will very likely crack and get fully smashed. So you better operate this phone with care and diligence. When before I spoke about the strategic cooperation of Leica with Xiaomi, I mentioned the Xiaomi 17 Ultra as a milestone from last December, where Xiaomi basically said in their press release, this takes this strategic cooperation completely to the next level. And what I want to do next is quickly explaining to you what is the difference between the Xiaomi 17 Ultra, which came to market by the end of December 2025, and the Leica Leitzphone. Let's first look into what the Xiaomi 17 Ultra and the Leica Leitzphone have in common. And generally, they share the same hardware. Top-notch triple camera system, we come to that. The main camera has a 1-inch sensor, which is a large sensor for a smartphone. They have a 200 megapixel periscope tele lens with optical zoom and optical image stabilization. The focal length is 75 to 100 millimeter. They have a top-notch processor, the Snapdragon 8 Elite Generation 5, a top-notch OLED display, 6000 milliampere hour battery in the European Union. I think in China it's even 6500 milliampere hours, if I'm not mistaken. They have very quick charging. They are steered by HyperOS 3 with Hyper AI, and they also have content authenticity initiative support. And both phones have a dedicated security chip, which is what's still missing in some modern Leica cameras, like the Leica SL3. What distinguishes the Leica Leitzphone from the Xiaomi 17 Ultra is that the Leitzphone has been developed under Leica-led authorship and with Leica experience layer. So we talk here about a Leica industrial design authorship. Leica designed UI UX that concerns the themes, the icons, the fonts, the widgets. 13 Leica Looks integrated. That's the full set, by the way. In typical Leica cameras, if they have the Leica Looks feature available, there is end of story after a bunch of Leica Looks, and you cannot transfer them all to your camera. 5 Leica background bokeh simulations. So we have a Summicron, a Summilux, a Noctilux, an Anamorphic, a Tambar. I'll show you all of this live in a moment on the phone. We have a Leica Essential mode, which currently is populated by an M9 daylight mode and an M3 monopan mode. We have a Leica UI UX integrated functional mechanical camera ring. I showed this already with the haptic feedback, Leica Frames and Leica aesthetic ecosystem features, a global Leica-led marketing and positioning, and a Leica retail strategy and account integration. So you can purchase this in Leica stores and authorized Leica retailers. But to be honest, the Leica Leitzphone is not new, and this is not the first time that a human being on planet Earth is seeing this phone when it is finally announced by Leica on the 28th of February, because Xiaomi already in that press release I showed before from the end of December 2025 announced a smartphone which they called Xiaomi 17 Ultra by Leica. And that is essentially the phone we are going to spend our time with in this video. It has all the features, the UI, UX features. It has the same design. It has the knurling on the metal finish on the side. It has exactly the same hardware. It even has the ring around the camera island, which you can use to operate the camera in photography and videography, and so on and so on. So it's essentially the same phone. And my takeaway when I looked through 73 pages of marketing material and then had the Leica Leitzphone finally in hand, my conclusion is that the product which is announced today when I'm posting this video on February 28 is the Xiaomi 17 Ultra by Leica, but now for the market outside of China. Let's now look live into some of these features I had on the list before. And I will not do very likely complete coverage of every tiny little detail. This video would get way off too long, but I promise I purchased this phone for myself. And if you guys are interested, and drop me a comment when the time is right, I will come back with a fully fledged tutorial on the camera functions, video functions, in the way I do it for other Leica gear. And you know me, I'm typically doing this in a very diligent way. So let's start to look into the design. If I open this up here, you see it already in the start screen. Everything here, the way the text is appearing, the way the icons are chosen. This is a graphical user interface which speaks like a design language. And it reminds me a lot in the GUI and the UIX I have when I operate my Leica Q3 cameras and the Leica SL3. And I mentioned in a couple of videos that Leica basically made the design of these camera platforms the same. And that's what we see here. There are dedicated widgets, like here for the LFI magazine. You have a widget here, which if I would set it up for actually using the GPS in the smartphone, I could see here the golden hour times. You know, everything in the design, how this is carried out in terms of icons, in terms of how this is done. This is all living and breathing Leica design language. And I like that a lot. And you can switch here between different designs. They provide two different themes here. If I switch this off, you see this one here, which is in kind of red color, is a reddish design. And then there is an alternative one, which is also provided from scratch, which you see if you go here to themes. And then you go to my account, and under themes, you see here there's another one, which they also had in the marketing brochure. Let me quickly apply it. And then you will see how this all changed in terms of background picture, startup screen here in basically the screen which you get if the phone is locked. And this is all Leica photography. This is pure, it's minimalistic, but it's very clear what you need to do if you want to operate this phone. And all in, I like this design language a lot. It's consistent from the exterior up to the interior in the way this firmware and the software in the phone is set up, and it's all living and breathing Leica design language. I want to quickly show you how this camera ring here is working with that haptic feedback, which I clearly feel, which I think is done in a very nice way. Let's open this up. The camera app sits here. Nice icon, by the way. And if I go in here into the normal photo mode, for instance, the ring currently is set up for zoom. And you see this here? I can zoom. Let me maybe turn this into landscape orientation. And if I turn the ring, I'm now at ultra wide angle 0.6 times. And then if I turn the ring, I can in a very smooth way zoom here all the way up. And you see it here changing in terms of magnification factor. And this is set up for zoom. You see, I can do this also very quickly. It's responsive, it's nice, it's smooth, it's fluent. And it's of course also due to the excellent hardware specification of this OLED display and the processing going on in the smartphone. How do you customize that? Well, you tap here and then you go to settings. And in settings, you go to general, and then you find here the camera ring. And you see in the different modes here, in photo mode, this is continuous zoom. In video, this is continuous zoom. In portrait mode, it's continuous zoom. In Pro, it's exposure value, so exposure compensation, and so on. But I can customize this now and can say here, for instance, switch focal length, or exposure value means exposure compensation. Let's go back here. Let's go back into the live view. Let's turn this into landscape format. And now if I turn the ring, you see here the scale for exposure compensation. Now I'm making the whole scene darker, and here I make it brighter. And you see I can do this in a very aggressive way if I want. And the haptic feeling when you operate this camera ring is really, really cool. And the way how quickly the live view responds and the settings, now I'm level metered back at 0. This is done in a very nice way. And for each of these sections here, so let's have a quick look. We have here live cinematography, we have pro photography, videography, We have the normal photo mode, portrait mode. I'm going to show you sample images, a lot of sample images later in the video. We have the 200 megapixel Tele function, and we have the Leica Essentials, which I mentioned and will cover in more detail in a moment. So in all these modes, this camera ring has a function, and what function it has can be customized here if I go into the settings, to general and to camera ring. So in video, for instance, I can also switch this to exposure compensation if I want. Or in the Pro mode, I have, of course, much more settings because I can manually steer my ISO, the filters, the shutter speed, white balance, and all of that. Even the focus can, in manual mode, if I switch into manual focus, be steered with that camera ring. And that is a very natural way of operating a smartphone camera, and is the way we do it on our cameras, right? We constantly, continuously operate rings, the focus ring, the aperture ring, you know, what have you. And here, this is done in a very nice way. And if you're done with taking photos, you just protect the lens by this lens cap here, which is very valuable and very nicely done with a very cool Leica engraving. Simple like that. Next, let's have a quick look into the Leica Looks and the styles and filters we have here. And this is currently on Leica Chrome. And I can basically scroll here through all these different filters if you look here. For instance, if I want to know what brass means, I tap on the eye here. And then I get information in the same way as you know it when you connect, for instance, your Leica camera to the Leica Photos app and go and browse through these different looks. And all in, we have here 13 styles, 13 filters we can use. If you don't want to use a filter, go to standard. And then in I, it says it delivers a balanced and versatile look, blah, blah, blah. So this is the way how to use the Leica Looks. And this is now here shown in the photo section. The bokeh simulations we spoke about at the beginning of the video when I looked into the features of the Leica Leitzphone and compared them with the Xiaomi 17 Ultra. They are, for instance, here in the portrait mode. And in the portrait mode, you can also steer your aperture. Let's have a look here. And you see here, I can go widest open to f0.95, and I can stop down all the way, which is standard for Leica M lenses, to f16. Now, don't be mistaken here. This is not physical aperture, what we are talking about. This is really simulation, emulation of a calibrated software profile, which Leica engineers implemented in that smartphone camera here. Early in the video, I spoke about the features of the Leica Leitzphone versus the Xiaomi 17 Ultra. And I mentioned 5 bokeh simulations. And you find them in portrait mode here. If we steer the aperture, for instance, you see here the first choice is a summicron lens. If we tap on the little information button here, we also get a description of what that is. And nicely done here with Leica Witness to a Century, 100 years, the celebration from last year. And I can switch now here from summicron to Summilux. Again, I get a description here. I can switch to Noctilux simulation, or probably it's better to call it an emulation. That's probably more precise. Tambar and anamorphic. And that is quite interesting. I need to try this out further. This is my introductory video, not my fully fledged tutorial, which I likely will provide for this smartphone camera. And it's very nice that you have these simulations here. Of course, I need to shoot portraits and then with these different bokeh simulations, put them side by side to get a better understanding what they do. You get a bit of information here, what it is all about, but I don't think that's enough to really use that in an effective and efficient manner. The way the camera builds 200 megapixel telephoto images is a very interesting process, and I want to show you this quickly here in my introductory video. So let's switch to 200 megapixel, and the focal length here is optical 75 to 100 millimeter. I can choose this here. I'm currently on 75, this is 85, this is 90, and this is 100 millimeter. And now watch what happens if I release that shot here. It will start in a 3x3 grid like a mosaic to basically develop these components of the image and then create an overall 200 megapixel image. And if I go here into the preview mode, this is very detailed now. Look at that. This is absolutely fabulous. And I will show you later real life samples in the sample image section of this video, where you can see what this is capable of doing. When I saw this the first time after shooting this smartphone here, it was blowing me away, because this is an image quality we get here. And as I said, you will see it in real life samples we were not able to achieve some years back, even with highly professional cameras. So this is really, really good. And you see also I was very close to Jennifer, so I can also use this for close-up and macro type shooting situations. What I want to do next is I want to provide you a bit of a flavor of the Pro photography app here, and that's in the Pro section. If we go to Pro, we find here the usual parameters. We find shutter speed, ISO, exposure compensation or exposure value, and so on. And we can also set the format here. And by the way, in the settings, you can also steer your file format and your resolution. I just show it here in this particular part of the video. So we have here 12.5 megapixel, 50 megapixel, and 200 megapixel. And we have, in terms of file formats here, we have JPEG, RAW, and Ultra RAW. And if I stay on Ultra RAW for the moment, of course, that's the ultimate quality you get with basically all the information the camera is capturing for you. If you go to JPEG, you have the usual discount in terms of quality and information stored in the file, what you know from your usual photography workflow. Let's stay at Ultra RAW for a moment. And I can switch now here, for instance, to 50 megapixel and get highly detailed pictures in the Ultra RAW format. If I go to 200 megapixel, this will fall back to JPEG automatically. So I cannot shoot here in RAW or in Ultra RAW. If I tap on RAW here, it switches back on the resolution to 12.5. I can shoot though in 50 megapixel RAW. So there are the usual restrictions, which are basically a combination of hardware and software. And if you want to change your parameters here and steer them manually, for instance, let's go to ISO as an example. I deactivate the automatic mode, and now I can steer my ISO here in a manual way, and this goes up to 12,800. Now the effect in live view is minim, because I have a lot of automatic functions activated on other parameters here. But that's the way you can basically steer it. And when trying it out and walking with the phone through Zurich downtown, I found this very interesting, and it's very satisfying to some extent to have full manual control over all these parameters in the light triangle, what have you. This camera app here in the Leitzphone is so rich in terms of functions, features, settings, that when I finally will come to the conclusion to do a fully fledged tutorial, it will probably be 60 to 90 minutes to go through all these functions. I want to show you one more feature here, which I find pretty cool. Let's go here back on ISO to auto. And what I can do here is I can go to focus. And you see here the macro symbol, the usual one. Let's deactivate auto. And now it's switched to MF. So I have manual focus. And this becomes extremely convenient if I combine it with the camera ring. So let's swipe down here. Let's go to settings. Let's say general, camera ring. And then in camera ring, I switch this on. And I go here to Pro. And say in Pro, I want to have focus. And now the camera ring should be the physical, mechanical control element to control my focus. Let's get Jennifer a bit closer so we might see this. And currently, Jennifer is blurry. And let me go here. I don't know if you can see this. Here I can steer my focus. Let's get her even a bit closer. And you see here, this is a bit blurry. Here I get closer to focus. And here, if I go to infinity, it completely blurs out. Now, of course, this is a good instrument to find manual focus if you think your autofocus is not precise enough for you. But it is also interesting because you can manually blur the foreground to use it for creative photography and creative effects. And I think this is one of the many features you can use in this smartphone to really make it your own and use it in a way. Let's go back to automatic, and then it finds Jennifer's face immediately. So you have full control over all parameters. And to be honest, in my iPhone 17 Pro Max, that is one of the features I'm really missing in the native Apple camera app, that I cannot shoot in a pro mode and control every parameter in the light triangle and maybe also focus and other parameters in a fully manual way by my own decision. You need to go and fall back to third-party apps if you want to do that in the Apple universe. Here with the Xiaomi universe, where Leica embedded their Leitzphone, this of course is possible in the same way as typically in the Android operating system. You have more tweaking optionality than you have in the Apple world, because Apple is providing more control over what's happening with their gadgets. Another feature this Leitzphone is offering is called Leica Frames. It's basically an embedding of your photo into a frame with a watermark and basic shooting parameters. It's pretty well done, I should say. I do this here in the normal photo mode to show it to you. And by the way, I don't want to accidentally now steer here. Let's see what's currently set up for the camera ring. This is currently the magnification, the zoom. Let's level meter this at 1.0 and let's switch this off for a moment. So in my demonstration, I don't accidentally change the magnification. Let's go here to general. And if that camera ring is doing something you are not intended to do because you accidentally touch it, you can also deactivate the steering mechanism and just get it away. And now frames, if I swipe down, is here. I can go here to frame. And currently it's off. I can switch it on, and then I have all kinds of options I can choose here in order to embed my image into a frame. And that's pretty well done. If I say, for instance, I want to have this one, then it allows me to choose the frame background, and you can also include the coordinates if GPS is activated and the timestamp. Let's keep it that way for the time being, and let's take a shot here. Let's do this at, I don't know, 2 times here. Let's take Jennifer. Boom. Have a look at the image. And now you see this is embedded in a frame. And if I crop in here, you see it says Leitzphone powered by Xiaomi. It has a Leica logo. It's a 46mm focal length. I was shooting at the aperture was an f1.67, 1/791 seconds, and an ISO of 50. This all happened at the time after lunch, 12:58. And I also get a stamp for the date here. It's the 17th of February in 2026. Instead of swiping down and accessing this here, you can also go to the general settings, and then you find it here under frame. And you see there are many, many templates you can choose in order to embed your image in a frame with additional information. Very well done, I should say, and something probably a lot of people will use, in particular if they want to provide shooting information. And you can later also remove that, of course, and just keep the naked image. And then here I want to show you one more section besides the video section, which I'm going to cover very quickly, which is interesting. And this is called live cinematography. And this is pretty cool. First of all, you can define here different emulations. You have red carpet, portrait, freestyle, and you also have here, let's go to darker area, Ultra HD Live. And we can select one of those. Let's stay with red carpet here. I think that's fine. And now let's define a range. Let's say we take a zoom range up to 5 times here. And let's go back here. And now let me focus on Jennifer and let's push that button. Watch what happens. Let's get this processed. And now look at the clip. I'm going to play it for you. Watch what happens. Watch what happens. Kind of a very smooth drive towards Jennifer. And for sure, this will get firmware updates over time, because I think it could be even smoother in my personal humble opinion. But there is a lot you can, in a creative way, do here with this live cinematography section. I need to try this out further, in particular for tiny little clips, maybe even for the studio when I want to show you something. But this is clearly something in combination with these different styles you have here, which is quite well done and can, of course, be further improved. I'm not even sure, by the way, if this smartphone here is still a pre-production sample, since it was already opened, or whether this is already the final product. We'll see by the end of February, beginning of March, when it hits the stores. Let's see and let's find out. As I said before, for sure, I will purchase this phone and explore a lot more of these options the phone is offering. Last but not least, we have a video section here. Let me go there and let me show it to you. And we have here all kinds of formats we can choose. We can go up to 8K videography here. We can go up to 120 frames in 4K mode. If we go to 8K mode, it goes up to, let's see here, well, 30 frames per second. And you can tweak this in the usual way, like with any other smartphone. It has a lot of options. You can use the Leica Looks here if you want and scroll through them. 13 looks, as I said. You have a lot of settings you can steer. You have beauty filters, all these type of things. The functions which are provided in that Leica Leitzphone are so rich, and I think I said this before, that it takes hours to explore them all and finding out what they all mean and how they can be used for creative videography and photography. Of course, you can also magnify here, go to different focal lengths if you want in video mode. And I will show you a couple of clips because I think the video stabilization is working very well. Look here, I can tweak my brightness in the image, which is also nice. Let's go to Jennifer's face, then it should automatically adapt. And I will show you maybe right now a couple of clips which I recorded when walking through Zurich, handheld down the stairs, and in this way, basically moving the phone up and down and testing how well this is stabilized when walking. Let's look into these clips right now and then let's continue with the rest of the video. So here I was walking down from the hill where Lindenhof Place is in Zurich. I was shooting sample images there. I will show them to you later. And 8K video stabilization works quite well, as you can see here. Here the typical portrait mode in video, walking through Zurich downtown. And that's the format people typically use on Instagram, TikTok, what have you. And look, this is very stable. Even when I walk down the stairs here, it's very well stabilized. Here video clip in HD resolution only, but with sound. So showing you how this sounds if you record also audio. And of course you can apply all the filters from the Leica Looks and can zoom in, you know, can play and try to be creative with your videography. All works very well. Look here how much I can zoom in. And then of course it becomes a bit more shaky based on the telefocal length, but overall pretty good. Here while I'm talking I reduced of course the volume on the sound of the recorded clips, but let me play you one clip where you will hear the audio in its full beauty, how it is recorded, and then I stop my little demonstration about video capabilities and functionality. What I want to do next is I want to do technical explanations of this camera island here. And we have three cameras here. We have a main camera, we have the Tele camera, and we have an ultra-wide camera. And I want to provide all the specifications of these cameras and will basically also provide you with the crop factor, all the technical specifications you need to understand better what we are shooting here in this Leica Leitzphone. Let's start with the main camera, and this is a 1-inch ultra dynamic camera co-developed between Leica and Xiaomi. It has a resolution of 50 megapixel, it has an aperture of f1.67, and it incorporates optical image stabilization. Its sensor has the attribute Light Fusion 1050L, I come to that in a moment. The full frame equivalent focal length is 23 millimeter. You will see this in the specifications, the way Leica will have announced this camera. And we have OLFIC HDR technology, which sounds very fancy, but has a very simple meaning, which I'm going to cover in the next couple of minutes. Let's break this down. A 1-inch sensor typically refers by convention to a sensor size of 13.2 times 8.8 millimeter. So it's a smaller sensor, but a comparably large sensor for a smartphone. This yields by the theorem of Pythagoras to a sensor diagonal of 15.9 millimeter. A full frame sensor has a diagonal of 43.3 millimeter, and by putting them in perspective and relation, we end up with a crop factor of 2.72. If we apply this to the 23 millimeter full frame equivalent focal length, we end up at a physical focal length. The physical focal length of the lens sitting over the main camera sensor is 8.5 millimeter. And if we apply the same math to the physical aperture, which is specified as f1.67, we end up at a full frame equivalent depth of field aperture of an f4.5. Now, LOFIC stands for Lateral Overflow Integration Capacitor. And this is a technology that refers to a sensor design in which each pixel includes an additional overflow capacitor that stores excess charge instead of clipping the highlights. And this enables, of course, a wider dynamic range within a single exposure. It reduces blown highlights in high contrast scenes, and it improves shadow highlight balance without the need to combine various frames to one single HDR frame as we know it when we, for instance, underexpose, correctly expose and overexpose, and then combine these frames into one single frame by HDR software. And then the last thing I want to clarify here is Light Fusion 1050L. That, if it corresponds to a sensor, means that the sensor combines various techniques like pixel binning, dual conversion gain, like for instance we know it from Hasselblad medium format cameras, and the LOFIC HDR architecture to extend the dynamic range, improve highlight retention, and enhance low light performance, which, by the way, is something I will try out as soon as I have my own Leica Leitzphone. We'll shoot it in almost complete darkness to see how much information I can recover later in post. Let's try to verify what we just calculated. And let's take a shot with the main camera. I'm in the photo section at 1x magnification. Let's take a shot. And the main camera has a full frame equivalent focal length of 23 millimeter. So let's go in here. Let's go to details. And then we see all the parameters of that shot. And we see we have here equivalent focal length 23 millimeter, but physical focal length is 8.71 millimeter, and I just calculated 8.5 millimeter. So it seems that my calculations perfectly make sense. The deviation we see here might be tiny little tolerances in the way the sensor dimensions really are and how I thought they are specified, but give or take, this is about what we calculated. Calculation was 8.5 millimeter physical focal length, and here we see 8.71 millimeter. Let's now look into the telephoto camera. We have here a 1 divided by 1.4 inch sensor. 200 megapixel, you saw the mosaicing process, and that is fascinating to watch. We have a physical aperture of f2.39 to f2.96. We also have optical image stabilization, which is kind of a must-have for a tele camera. We have, in terms of sensor, a Samsung HPE image sensor, and the full frame equivalent focal length is 75 to 100 millimeter, as you have seen various times now in the video clips when I was filming the smartphone, and we did choose the focal length in the live view. We have then, in terms of sensor dimensions, by convention, 9.1 times 6.9 millimeter. Again, there might be tiny little deviations in the way I think this sensor is specified dimension-wise, and it is really specified in the camera. This would yield a sensor diagonal of 11.4 millimeter. If we put this in relation to a full frame sensor diagonal, we end up at a crop factor of 3.8. Applying this to the focal length, the equivalent focal length of 75 to 100 millimeter gives us a physical focal length range between 19.7 and 26.3 millimeter. And as before, we are going to verify this in a moment. And if we apply this all to the physical aperture, we end up at a full frame equivalent depth of field like aperture of f9.1 to f11.3. So in the setup we are used to, namely full frame equivalent sensors, heavily stopped down. In terms of Samsung HPE image sensor, what does it mean? It refers to Samsung's ISOCELL HP series. It's typically 200 megapixel sensors. We see this also in, for instance, Samsung Galaxy smartphones. And the silicon is manufactured by Samsung Semiconductor, not by Sony, as we see it for many other sensors. Samsung really is specialized in tiny little sensors with super high resolution, as you see, for instance, in a lot of their flagship phones. And HP and in brackets here E design in Samsung technology typically is standing for an extremely high resolution, very small native pixel pitch, advanced pixel binning modes, and multi-gain HDR architectures. All right, so let's also here try to verify what I just calculated for the tele lens. Let's go into the 200 megapixel tele lens, and I calculated a range of physical focal length from 19.7 to 26.3. So let's take a shot at 75 millimeter, and we'll see that interesting process again with the 3x3 fields here in the mosaic, updating slowly one after the next. And then we can go into the preview here, watch the image, go back into the details, and find out this is here equivalent focal length 75 millimeter, but physical focal length is 19.9. I calculated 19.7. Again, tiny little tolerances here and there. I might not have figured out the exact specifications, but the calculations make sense. 19.9 here in the detail info and 19.7 calculated in terms of physical focal length. Let's do the same for 100 millimeter focal length in terms of full frame equivalent focal length. Let's take the shot, watch the mosaic process again. I find this totally fascinating, to be honest. This is really nerdy stuff. I like it. And let's also here check the detail info. Here we go. This is the image, and I calculated 26.3. Let's see what the data says here. Here it says now 26.5. So again, I'm 0.2 off. 26.5 versus calculated 26.3. But seems that my math perfectly makes sense. Equivalent focal length was 100 millimeter. Last but not least, we need to look into the ultra-wide camera. We are talking about a 1 divided by 2.76 inch camera sensor, and the resolution is 50 megapixel as we find in the specifications of the Leica Leitzphone and the marketing material. Physical aperture is an f2.2 and the sensor is a Samsung JN5 image sensor. 14 millimeter equivalent focal length, so this is really ultra wide, and the field of view corresponds to 115 degrees. If we look into the typical convention, what that means in terms of sensor size, we talk about an even smaller sensor here, 5.2 times 3.9 millimeter. If we calculate the diagonal, we end up at 6.46 millimeter, and that implies a crop factor of 6.7, give or take. If we then backwards calculate the physical focal length by dividing 14 millimeter, which is the full frame equivalent focal length, by its crop factor, 6.7, we end up at a physical focal length of 2.1 millimeter. And applying the same math to the physical aperture means if we want to see the aperture in a full frame equivalent depth of field, then we talk about an f14.7, so even further stopped down in the usual context where we judge about aperture in photography. Looking quickly into the sensor, which is in the ultra-wide camera, it's a Samsung ISOCELL JN5 sensor, and that boils down to it is designed for compact modules with low power consumption. It supports multi-gain HDR and advanced on-sensor readout modes, and it's optimized for ultra-wide and secondary camera applications. In essence, the Samsung JN5 is a compact 50 megapixel ISOCELL sensor with very, very small native pixels and pixel binning capability, designed for ultra-wide modules where size efficiency and computational processing are more critical than photon capacity. Last but not least, let's do the backtesting for the ultra-wide lens. So I go here in the photo mode to 0.6 times. You see Jennifer visually moving away from us based on the ultra-wide angle. And let's take a shot. And I calculated for the ultra-wide lens and camera here, I calculated 2.1 millimeter physical focal length. Let's see what we get. Here are the details. And we see equivalent focal length is 14 millimeter. That's according to specifications and also here in the detail info. And the physical focal length is 2.13 millimeter versus 2.1 millimeter calculated. So I think with what I presented to you, we altogether have understood this camera island pretty well. What I want to show you next are sample images shot with the new Leica Leitzphone. And you already saw the video clips before where I was walking up and down the streets in Zurich. And I was taking a lot of images because I really wanted to have in my introductory video a lot of footage to show you what this phone is capable of. And to cut a long story short, it's amazing what this smartphone is delivering with its camera island here. And we just learned all the specifications about the 3 cameras here, the tele lens, the main camera and the ultra wide camera. And I think it's terrific. I've not seen, and that's my own personal humble opinion, such good footage coming from a smartphone. But please judge yourself and drop me a comment what you think after you've seen the sample images. You heard me saying twice in the video clips before that I'm totally fascinated by the 200 megapixel telecamera and the way this 3x3 mosaic is building up over a few seconds to finally create a 200 megapixel frame. And this is the first shot I want to actually show you. And don't be mistaken. The metadata here in the upper left-hand side corner says 26.5 millimeter, but that's the physical focal length. The full frame equivalent focal length, as I showed you before in the more technical part of this video, is actually 100 millimeter. And this is an amazing image. The level of sharpness, the level of detail you get in the image, the crispiness, but also contrast, micro contrast, the way the scene is rendered, everything here is just absolutely mind-blowing in my opinion. Cropping into the image, we find so much detail in this image. And I will walk you a little bit around here. Look at the church towers currently in renovation. Look at the houses downtown Zurich. Look at the mountains rendered in the background. The windows, the way this terrace is appearing here. This is fascinating what's going on here. And guys, this is a smartphone, right? I've seen a lot of good footage from my iPhone 17 Pro Max, but this here clearly is next level. In my opinion, there's not much to add here. I think the image quality speaks clearly for itself. And I hope you agree. Drop me a comment what you think. And this will continue throughout the images we are going to look into. And by the way, also on the physical focal length in the upper left-hand side corner, don't be mistaken, it's physical, not full frame equivalent focal length. Here another image. This is also a tele image here, is sitting between 75 and 100 millimeter full frame equivalent focal length. And it just looks good. Also the way the colors come across. I think this is nicely rendered. And you see one of the big universities here in the upper part of the image in the background. And we see a lot of things going on in that scene. Tiny little people walking the streets across River Limmat here in Zurich. Here another tele image. And this is also, I think, good, well rendered, nicely done by this camera island. Moving on with the images, because this is all shot from Lindenhof Place in Zurich. We have this famous fountain here. And if you look at that, you wouldn't think that this is from a smartphone. Look if I crop in what this is delivering here. That fountain is so crisp, so clear, looks so good. Here a 12.6 megapixel image, wide angle of course. And here you don't have a lot of crop reserves, but it's a nicely rendered image. Here the Hotel Storchen, and this Leica Leitzphone really is a spy phone. Look at this. Here you are in wide angle, then you can crop in. Then you start to zoom in optically and later digital, and you zoom further in. You see these people sitting here enjoying their drinks, coffee, tea, what have you. And you can get closer and closer, and you will get more and more details. And at a certain point in time, you will be able to identify those people if you would know them. This is absolutely amazing. Look at that. You just see them sitting there, and you came from a very far distance in the wide angle setting. Here are more images, Zurich downtown. I was really trying to catch different perspectives, people crossing the street here. And again, a very high level of details and a very nicely rendered image. Going back into the wide angle setting here, this super wide field of view, this camera can deliver here. And then of course, a very nice image composition here. And I will come back to this image later in the course of the video because I want to show you something. Here again, super wide angle, super wide field of view over River Limmat toward churches downtown in Zurich. And, you know, using the different perspectives you have by the optical zoom And by the zoom capabilities of this phone, you can get very close to St. Peter Church Tower here. And you start very wide, and then you go in with your first zoom level, and then you zoom further in, and you have now to choose your image composition and selection, what in the frame you want to see. And then you end up at 24 minutes past 5 p.m. on St. Peter's Church Tower. And look how clear this image looks if I crop in. This is really a phone where you can use all focal lengths across the whole spectrum. Here the Zurich Opera, very nice, with people sitting on chairs freely available in front of the building. Here a group of musicians and dancers. And here again, from very wide field of view, super wide angle, and then slowly starting to zoom in with that smartphone, which by the way is a lot of fun. I really like doing it, and trying it out and testing this phone was a lot of fun. And then with each level of optical zoom, I crop deeper into a scene which was super wide before, and no matter where I go, I find goodness, clarity, sharpness, and good image quality. The mountains in the background of Zurich, nice perspective, and you see they are also nicely rendered here. Then here on the left-hand side, the opera again, and it's getting darker outside. We see the city lights coming into glow, which is nice. I'll show you a couple of images on that in a moment. And here, for instance, the Rolex boutique on Bahnhofstraße. And that's where you can purchase your fancy watches if you have the budget for it. But looking at this image, it looks actually really good. And the light comes across in a very nice way. I like that it's not only a temperature effect, but it's just coming across nicely. With one caveat, the guy here is rendered in a bit awkward way. Maybe he's behind the window. And here we have, you know, famous buildings in Zurich, Bahnhofstraße. This is opposite of Paradeplatz. And I've done a lot of night shots with my iPhone 17 Pro Max. But as I said before, what I see here in terms of blue hour exposures when the city lights are on, this is really next level in terms of quality. This is done very well. And I think you're probably not getting into pro camera territory, but you're getting very close to it. Here you see the famous Louis Vuitton store on Bahnhofstraße, and I want to move on now and show you a couple of portraits because they are insane too. Here you see now a couple of portraits, which, as I mentioned before, Ivan, the head of Leica marketing in Switzerland, was shooting in the Leica store in Zurich. And this is Andreas, good friend of mine. And he's actually heading the Leica Academy Switzerland. And if you look at that image, skin tone, the natural texture of his skin, the colors, everything in terms of sharpness and detail, this is absolutely pro level. I've never seen a portrait shot with a smartphone that reveals this type of image quality like you see it here in Andreas' face. And I explicitly asked him if I have permission to use this image in my video here, and he said yes, kindly enough. Thanks for that, Andreas. But it is a very, very good image. And that's the way my friend looks like, you know. I know him very well. Almost every week we see each other, we talk to each other, you know, we discuss what's going on at Leica and in the camera world. And if you look at the representation of his face here, this could not have been done better with a professional camera, period. Absolutely mind-blowing in my opinion. Absolutely fascinating what this phone is delivering here. And if I'm not mistaken, Ivan was shooting this in the portrait mode. The next couple of images show our friend Stevie. He's a Leica veteran, works in the Leica store in Zurich. And here he looks a bit skeptical, probably asking himself, are we now selling phones or cameras, or what are we doing here? But then he looked a bit more friendly, and we have kind of the same quality as what you guys saw before in Andreas' face. This is the most natural representation of a face shot with a smartphone camera, like here, Andreas' face, that I've ever seen, period. This is really, really cool. And Stevie, yes, from now on, you're also selling phones, not only cameras and lenses. Last but not least, I wanted to look into some RAW files shot in the lower resolution to get some impressions and indications about their quality and information richness. And these images here, they are all RAW files, so .dng, digital negative. and they are shot with 12.5 megapixel. And the background for this exercise is the following. If you want to upscale an image to a much higher resolution, for instance, with gigapixel AI, which I'm going to show you in a moment, you need to have really good quality in the source image. And only if the source image is of highest quality in terms of information stored, like here in a DNG file, then and only then gigapixel AI will be in a position to scale this up to, let's say, 50 megapixel, which I'm going to show you in a moment, so that it looks really good and is of highest quality. So this is the image I took for my gigapixel AI experiment. It's 12.5 megapixel. It's a digital negative, so .dng, so a RAW file coming straight out of the Leitzphone. And you see this is a nice image. The source file looks clean to me, and it looks already good at 12.5 megapixel. But what I wanted to do, of course, now is using gigapixel AI and scaling this up to a 50 megapixel image. And as just said, this only works if this source image, which you see here in front of you, is information rich and is of top-notch quality. Only then gigapixel AI will deliver satisfying results. And gigapixel AI delivered this image here. So this is now 49.9 megapixel. Let's call it a 50 megapixel image. And it looks, of course, exactly the same like its 12.5 megapixel sibling. So let me put them side by side to give you a better impression what this means. On the left-hand side, 12.5 megapixel. On the right-hand side, upscaled 50 megapixel with gigapixel AI. And first of all, they look exactly the same, of course, but the resolution is totally different. And since the quality, and that was what my testing was all about, the quality of that source file on the left-hand side is so good, only because of that, gigapixel AI was able to deliver a really good 50 megapixel image on the right-hand side. So let me quickly crop in and show you that in the details you will see in the frame. Turns out that no matter where you go in the frame, you will find nothing but goodness. This is really good. The quality doesn't look like upscaled on the right-hand side. The source image on the left-hand side fully delivered, and that enables a very clean, fully usable for high-dimensional prints, right-hand side image with 50 megapixel. And I think that is, for me, the last point I wanted to make on sample images. This is a very important tool for me, that I'm able to upscale images. And we saw before in the video clips that you can even shoot RAW and ultra RAW natively with 50 megapixel. You just saw in the sample images that the Leica Leitzphone is capable of taking serious footage. And what might be on your mind if you have taken a really good image with that phone is that you want to protect it. And you can do this here. Let's go into the settings. And in the settings, you find here Content Credentials. And I spoke about that in the context of a couple of Leica cameras where this is implemented. It needs a dedicated hardware chip, which, by the way, is the reason why in the Leica SL3 you don't have content credentials in the way you have it here or in some other Leica cameras, because in the development cycle of the Leica SL3, it was too late to include that dedicated hardware chip. But here it's included, and I can switch this on. And you see, I already have here a copyright statement. I made this as math photographer. And in this way, my footage is protected. I can always prove if it is labeled in this way, if the content credentials are switched on, that this is my image, and every change I can track in Lightroom Classic, for instance. And that is something which is very useful, in particular these days where you have so many people trying to steal your images and your footage. And let's say you manage to get a really good image done with this phone, then you want to protect it. Here's the place to do it, under Content Credentials. Before I conclude the video, I want to go through some frequently asked questions. And that's just an anticipation, of course, because the phone at the point in time when I'm recording this has not been even announced in the market. So I don't know what really will be the urgent questions you might have to that phone. But I basically came up with some questions myself. If I would be in your shoes and having seen my video, what would be the questions I have at the end of the video? I want to walk you through these questions, will provide short answers, and then I will conclude the video. I want to start with the likely question concerning the difference between the Leica Leitzphone and the Xiaomi 17 Ultra, and I want to keep it short. Technically, these devices share the same hardware flagship platform. But the distinction here is not hardware, it's authorship. For the Leitzphone, Leica defined totally the industrial design, the UI, UX layer, and the creative imaging stack. Next question, what exactly means imaging stack? Well, an imaging stack is defined by layered components that build on each other. The first component, and the one which is very likely at the basement, the foundation, is the hardware layer. We talk about sensor, lenses, optical image stabilization, image signal processing, chipsets, all of that. The next level is low-level processing. And this is noise reduction, HDR merging, demosaicing, tone mapping, sharpening, and all of that. The next level is color science layer, which is very important in the Leica context. And by the way, also in the Hasselblad context, we talk about white balance logic, color matrices, lookup tables, the so-called LUTs, contrast curves, etc. The next level is the aesthetic layer. It's the looks, the film simulations, the bokeh rendering, the styles, grain, vignetting, all that is visible for the one who is later staring at the image. And then the user interaction layer, of course, UI, UX. How does the user, the photographer, control everything that's happening? The ring behavior, for instance, which we can customize, as I showed you, the UI layout and all of that. What exactly is the Leica Essential Mode? We are AI models trained on Leica camera and lens combinations. Well, it's a dedicated section which I showed to you in the video in the camera app of the Leitzphone that digitally emulate classic Leica looks. And currently it enables a dedicated Leica M9 color profile and a Leica M3 monochrome profile. But there is more to come. Leica clearly says in the marketing material, this is the initial choice you have. M9 color, M3 monochrome profile, but there is more to come. Clearly the M9 and the M3 have their characteristic profiles in color and monochrome, and with these digitally emulated profiles, photographers can kind of recreate the specifics, the characteristics of an M9 and an M3 camera. What is the authenticity and copyright protection in the Leitzphone? We just went through that. It's a dedicated security chip that adds cryptographically secured metadata and enables a proof of origin and copyright protection services in line with C2PA standards for image authenticity. What are the roles of Leica versus Xiaomi in their strategic partnership for the Leitzphone? And that's a very interesting and, by the way, also a very natural question. Who is doing what in that cooperation? Well, Leica camera, let's make this very clear, is not involved in the production of the Leica Leitzphone powered by Xiaomi. So Leica is not manufacturing this phone. This is not made in Germany. This is made in China like any other iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max. The camera modules are the result of a joint research and development department that leverages the core strengths of both companies. Hardware coming from Xiaomi, photography know-how coming from Leica. Xiaomi provides the hardware with image quality validation against Leica's highest standards. Leica, in contrast, provides its comprehensive expertise in optical engineering and imaging software. Leica supports Xiaomi in order to achieve the best possible imaging results with respect to Leica standards. Leica was clearly involved in key areas such as optical development, image aesthetics, lens simulations, distinct looks, bokeh simulations, and the design of imaging-related user experience features. And I mentioned this before. Everything I see in the graphical user interface of the Leica Leitzphone reminds me a lot, and I'm meaning a lot, in the graphical user interface of a Leica SL3 and Leica Q3 cameras. Leica was in the lead for the whole design of the Leica Leitzphone. It represents Leica's design philosophy. Besides the Xiaomi 17 Ultra, there is already the Xiaomi 17 Ultra by Leica. What is the difference to the new Leica Leitzphone? Well, this might be disappointing for some of you, and I mentioned it already. The Xiaomi 17 Ultra by Leica has been developed specifically for the Chinese customers of Xiaomi. The Leica Leitzphone powered by Xiaomi, that's the one we talk about in this video, by contrast, is a globally positioned product. The Leica Leitzphone is led by Leica's design philosophy, image character, and user experience. Both are expressions of the same partnership, but with clearly differentiated market focus and brand leadership. So these two phones are really the same, and the one we are talking about in this video is just the globally positioned product of the very same smartphone with the very same photography capabilities. Thus, LOFIC, so the lateral overflow integration capacitor we talked about when we spoke about the camera island, also improve video capabilities in the Leica Leitzphone? Yes, it does, because it can support wide dynamic range in a single exposure. So this technology is also helping you if you are a video shooter. It's not only good for still images. It can help HDR video look more stable, especially under flickering LED lights like you find it in shops or in street lighting. All right, that's it. That's all I wanted to say and show. So this is a phone which was not there before except for the Chinese market, namely the Xiaomi 17 Ultra by Leica with that attribute, quote unquote, by Leica. This is now the phone for us living in the rest of the world, and I think it's amazing. I will purchase this phone for myself. I mentioned it a couple of times. I will do much more shootings with the phone. It might even become my go-to camera for all the videos I do for my YouTube channel. And I think this is going way off beyond of what my iPhone 17 Pro Max is capable. And the design is so typical Leica. You know, this is living and breathing Leica design language, and I like that a lot. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There is always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.